my girlfriend was away for 2 days or 3 days, so I ended up, doing 20-hour days just to get the time in.
Nice.
And it turns out that having a girlfriend is a good idea.
This episode is sponsored by Component One, makers of Widgmo. If you need stunning UI elements or awesome graphs and charts, then go to widgmo.com and check them out. Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 20 of the JavaScript Jabber Show. This week on our panel we have Jamison Dance.
Howdy.
We have Tim Caswell.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that is Matt Pardee. Did I say that right?
Pardee, yeah.
Pardee.
Is it French?
It's something. I don't know. I think so.
Cool.
Pardee.
Pardee.
Please don't say that, actually. Don't do that.
Anyway, you're new to the podcast, so why don't you just introduce yourself for us?
Hi. Yeah, it's great to be here. I am the evangelist for Cloud9. That's my official title, but since we're a startup, I do a lot of different things on any given day, and one of those things that I do a lot is development. So I actually work on the IDE all the time and do marketing, and then I travel around and tell people about all the cool stuff that we're working on.
Awesome. So what exactly is Cloud9?
So Cloud9 is an IDE that we built entirely in the browser. And we didn't do it just because it was novel and something interesting to do. We did it because we think that the web is the best delivery mechanism out there for software. And it offers all these really amazing opportunities for collaborating on your code and for tapping your projects into run VMs and the power of working with distributed computers and working from anywhere that you want from any modern browser. If you have your laptop with you, or if you go home and you want to get on your desktop, or you go to work, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've been building it out for the last year and a half. We came out of beta last January at the demo conference, and since then we've just been innovating like crazy. And a couple of weeks ago, we came out with our new release that has collaboration, so real-time code editing. Each project is now powered by what we're calling a workspace, which is basically your own VM in the cloud, your own runtime environment, and more powerful code completion for JavaScript, and also a local version that you can use in the same way that you use Sublime, for instance. So you can actually launch a project from your terminal by just pressing the C9 command, or entering the C9 command, rather. And it'll open up your browser, and you can synchronize your projects with the cloud or pull them down locally to work on them offline.
We're going to ask, how does it work offline? Is that a premium feature? I messed around with it a little bit, but it was just a free account, so I couldn't tell what I just didn't know how to do and what it didn't have and what it had, but you had to be a premium member to use.
So you can use it as a free user, but we're working on the workflows. The workflows are not exactly clear at this point, but the idea is that when you launch the local client for the first time, it will ask you to sign in, and then you're synchronized with your hosted account. And then you can see your own online projects, and you can also see all of the projects that you started locally. So if you enter C9 and then a period after it in a workspace or in a project directory on your hard drive, it'll keep that record inside of the dashboard of your local instance. And then you can synchronize that project with the hosted version. And then when you're on your hosted version, there's a little button in the upper right corner that says synchronize for offline use. And then it'll connect to your local computer and make it available for offline use and download all the files there. So we built this because the browsers don't really have the ability to do this yet, and we wanted to make it so that the full vision of the IDE was realized on all fronts. There's this criticism that I think is in the back of everyone's minds about we're operating in the cloud, that once you're offline, then you're disabled or crippled in some way. And we recognized that, so we wanted to build this thing so your project files were with you wherever you went.
So if your project files are with you, then can you actually use Cloud9 effectively offline, or do you have to use another editor?
You can use Cloud9, so you actually get the whole IDE is opened in the browser locally. So we run a local server, and it's just a small little application. And we run a local server to review the files and manage your connection and all these things. I should maybe step back a little bit and say that what you see online at c9.io, or if you're operating locally, the entire IDE interface is something that we've open sourced. So that whole local version, quote unquote, is an open source package that you can go to GitHub. You can totally download it and use it and hack on it, and even submit pull requests and all those things. And on the hosted version, what we do is we spin up a process of the IDE every time that you open up a workspace. So that's all that is just the interface that we've taken then and implemented into a local version and spun it up every time that you want to start a project or synchronize it with the hosted version.
Cool.
That's sweet. Yeah. So I was just playing with it. I played with it a couple months ago. And then I used it again today, and it seems like it has a lot more features now. I was pretty impressed, actually. There were lots of things that I was like, well, this is kind of cool, but it can't do this. And then I'd look in the menu and be like, oh, yes, it can. It has fuzzy file opening, and you can move between tabs and stuff. It really feels like a pretty complete experience.
Thanks.
But what is it? So that's just me comparing to using it as a replacement for Vim or something, just like a normal editor. I'm editing code on my machine. So what do you think are the main advantages over just above and beyond just that it edits text as well as some other text editor,
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, of course, when you introduce a product to the world, you're inevitably compared to what's already out there. Sure. And, Cloud9 for a long time was sort of just proving this concept that you could actually do this in the browser. Some people that used it didn't really believe that it was a browser-based application. It may be a stretch for a lot of people who've used it for a while, but all the functionality that you get from the IDE existing in the browser was it just seemed to users like, this is a novel concept. This is kind of interesting, but maybe not something I can do for everyday development. And with our latest release, what we've done is we've taken that platform and kind of elevated it to the next level with all of these features like collaboration, which is something that existed in some projects like SubEthaEdit. Google just open sourced one of their internal projects that is based on collaborative code editing, and but it wasn't as established as you would say like Google Docs is for doing document editing, which is something that I use now on an everyday basis. So collaboration is definitely one of those features that I think everybody expected from a cloud-based IDE, and that's something that we just delivered that we think has the potential to totally change the game of remote development. You look at the landscape today of how people actually do work, and it's a lot different than the way it used to be because you can have a distributed team now. We've proven that with tools like Git or Mercurial, where you can have different people working on the same project, commit to their own branches, and then issue a pull request and get that pulled in. But there's still the problem of if you have a remote development team like we do at Cloud9, that not everybody is aware of what's going on. You can't really just turn around and ask somebody for help. And so we were kind of scratching our own itch there by implementing this, but we think it has much bigger potential than just helping teams get work done. We think that it could help with teachers teaching the art of programming in the classroom, or working at a conference, for instance, presenting and having people actually looking at the code as you're typing it instead of squinting their eyes trying to figure out what's going on the screen. So we think there's a lot of potential there for collaboration that it hasn't really been a part of the culture of programming for so long that people haven't, really tapped into the full power of it. But that's, something that we're really excited about. We just introduced it, and we have a lot of ways we think we can improve it. But, basically just the ability to see the same code that another user, up to, I think, 16 users at a time, can be editing the same file. And to chat with each other at the same time is really exciting. And then the other thing that I think is much more powerful in terms of how you actually get work done every day is what we're calling your workspace in the cloud. So this is the equivalent of putting your computer, your laptop in the cloud. A lot of people would, find it easiest to compare it to a VM. It's not exactly the same thing, but you basically have your own hard drive space, your own memory capacity. And if you're a premium user, we even give you a terminal that Tim worked on, and it allows you to connect directly to the box itself. And so every keystroke that you enter is sent to the server and then reflected back on your screen in the same way that you would do, a remote terminal normally, like over SSH or something. And so what we've done there by doing that, every workspace now has its own VM, is we make it possible to do things like run Apache or run a MySQL server, Postgres server, or something like that, and run Ruby and Python apps. So in one fell swoop, we went from this JavaScript specific Node.js tooling to something that, and it's still really great for all that stuff, by the way, but to something that is really powerful for your general development workflow. You can even, the other day I was compiling a C++ application. I know Tim just compiled Lua on his workspace. So
that's sweet.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I've heard about Cloud9 more in relation to JavaScript, and it has some nifty tools for that. But does it do Ruby and Python and Lua?
So
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the ACE editor is open source, and people have contributed highlighting for a lot of languages. And on top of that, we've done some integration at the IDE level for a lot of different platforms.
So the ACE editor, what do you mean by that?
That's the actual editor IDE thing, right?
Right. That's the actual text editor widget. It was written by Fabian. Mozilla joined, they had this thing called Bespin, and now they use ACE, and it's a really good text editor. It's just a widget that lives in the browser.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah. So so we're just starting to get into, so you can actually use the command line. Again, this is for premium users, but we're expanding out our run panel so that you can set up a PHP Apache server combination really easily when you click the run button, or when you click the preview button to preview PHP files. It will actually run it. I think that actually might be available today. We might have done a release a couple days ago that updated that. But also the same thing for Python and Ruby applications. You basically want to be able to hit the run button and have it start up. And I know that we are doing a release in a few days that will enable you to deploy your applications, your PHP applications, to Heroku. So we're upgrading the rest of our components to fit these kind of one-click visual workflows for all of our users, and then premium users can do everything on the command line like they would normally do on their own computer.
I just want to say that seems like one of the coolest parts. The collaboration thing is really cool. There's also some other stuff if you really want to collaborate. You can also do that in other ways, but the built-in, it feels like deployment is as much a part of the workflow as editing your code, which is really cool. You can also set that up on your own environment, but it's awesome that it's built in and it just happens by clicking stuff.
Yeah, there's some really cool integrations with, for instance, Cloud Foundry is a really great one since it's an open source pass.
Yeah,
you can actually supply your own endpoint. So if you have Cloud Foundry running on your own, Amazon stack or something like that, you can specify that IP address or that URL to deploy directly to that. And so, there's this opportunity here where you can have a staging server or a beta server and then a production server, and deploy to each one of those while you're developing. And Cloud Foundry, for Node.js applications at least, the deployment time and reboot time for a VM is something like 10 seconds. So you can do super, super fast deployments, instantly. And I should take this opportunity. Actually, it reminded me that we have another feature called Remote SSH that allows Cloud9 to, if you have an Amazon server, for instance, or another hosting provider like Media Temple, you can connect directly to that over SSH with Cloud9. And so Tim can talk a little bit about this. It uses a virtual file system. So Cloud9 is just the interface. On the back end, it's pulling in all the files and executing all the commands on your remote server. So if you already have a development server that's much more powerful, then you can connect directly to that. And if you have an Amazon server that you want to develop your projects on specifically instead of using Cloud9's backend, then you can do that.
So I want to jump in here real quick because it seems like you're kind of flirting with hosting. So do you actually provide hosting, or is this more of just a, hey, kind of see what your code's doing right at the moment, and when you want it out where people can use it, then you deploy it?
Yeah, so definitely the latter. There's this temptation and a really big one, and some cloud development providers are doing this, to do hosting because it's the logical next step, I think, in many people's minds. But we think about it differently. The hosting game is definitely very fluid, and it's really difficult to provide the kind of support that you would need if you were doing a hosting service. And so we're concentrating pretty much specifically on development, and in the way that you characterize the development environment kind of starting up when you're using it and shutting down when you're not using it is where we're really concentrating on. And then we integrate really well with all these deployment partners. And also you can use the command line tooling. Everyone can use Git, for instance, on the command line to push to providers like Nodejitsu or Nodestir or Heroku, and do that really easily and really quickly. So we're kind of replicating some of these hosting providers and providing Node.js and PHP and Apache support in Ruby and Python, and then you can test it on Cloud9 and then instantly deploy to all those other providers.
I have to say, actually, that's fairly heartening, just because I know several people who have gotten into the hosting game and found out that it's both very competitive and extremely difficult to do. And so, the fact that you guys are just going to focus on providing a terrific tool for editing code and, maybe doing a little bit of demo work with it, it's nice to know that you're not going to go and find a quagmire to be in while you excel in another area and then maybe have that bring the whole thing down.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's very, very tempting to do that, but like you said, it's really competitive, and this is a full-time job, that's for sure. We have about 30 people now working on Cloud9, and we are working night and day to make it a great service and trying to innovate as fast as possible. And we wouldn't really be able to do that if we were concentrating on providing scalable hosting infrastructure and everything that all the other guys do really well.
Right. And maybe this is a topic for another time, but I'd really like to talk when you have a chance about, the distributed development team and the nature of how you manage all of that. But I think that's another topic that we could spend another whole episode on. So I don't know if I want to go into it right now.
Yeah. Can we talk about the client side, just the JavaScript for the editor? Is that something that you are familiar with enough to talk about?
Yeah, definitely.
So what, can you talk about how your code's organized and what tools you guys use and kind of, some challenges and problems you've run into maybe? And then cool things you do.
Well, yeah. So our code base, I'd like to pass this off to Tim after I just give a little introduction, if he can talk about it at all, because we use common JS formats and modules and things like that, which he has a long
in the browser,
history.
You mean, or just
in the browser and cool. On the back end, we created this framework called Architect, which is a really amazing I mean, I can say it's amazing because I didn't build it. Someone else, some other people on my team did. But it's a really great way to encapsulate different pieces of functionality. And all the existing uses that you have for Node.js are still maintainable. So I'm actually working on I'm working on an Architect demo that uses Express as the web server component, but that's just one component of your application. It also has a database layer and a session layer and things like that. And Architect makes it really, really nice to build out your code base without in kind of a modern workflow, without compromising functionality or wondering where you're going to put this piece of functionality or how you're going to interact with the database, and all these questions that seem to crop up when you start to build anything that's worth anything. So that's kind of on the server side, and Tim can go into that a little bit more. On the client side, I think we're running around, 200, 300,000 lines of code at this point. And that's a pretty large JavaScript code base.
That's like Gmail size pretty much, right?
I can imagine.
Someone said Gmail was around 400,000 lines of code last time I heard.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so it's great. So what's cool about Cloud9?
That's a huge code base. Wow.
Yeah, what's cool about Cloud9 is that each component that you actually see in the editor is a plugin. So the file tree is a plugin, the editor, the tabs, console, et cetera, and we built it that way so that each component is isolated. A developer can work on a single component and build it up, and in each extension folder, there's then a few basic files. Typically, there's a skins file, UI file to actually describe the user interface components, and then the primary JavaScript file. And then from there, you can get, for instance, in our language extension, which does language analysis and shows you where you have breaking code in your JavaScript, or it provides code completion. That actually has about 10 accessory JavaScript files that are then loaded whenever you need them through require.js. And it has workers and things like that. So it's not ideal. We're going to be changing it to use Architect on the client side as well. But it actually, if you look at the Cloud9 code base, you can look at how it's designed on github.com/ajax.org/cloud9. Then you can see that on the client side, at least, all the different extensions are in their own little folders, and it's pretty nice. I don't know, Tim, do you want to go into how Architect works, or
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
So Architect is a plugin system I wrote for Node for Cloud9. It's a very, very simple framework. Basically, a plugin is a Node module that can provide or consume services. And so, like, if you want a web app, you create a plugin that provides an HTTP service. And then other plugins can consume the HTTP service. And using some API on that service, they can register routes. But Architect itself is completely agnostic to all this. It's just a very basic, what are your dependencies, what do they provide, what do you need, and it hooks it all up. And every plugin has to accept a configuration. So the way you build your app is you just write this big JSON file, which is which plugins and what options to send them. And so we refactored the backend of Cloud9 to use this. And so you can check out the code and basically build your own IDE, picking the components you want and configuring them how you want. And in the future, this is going to be very useful for testing and isolation, testing together, and all sorts of nice development tasks and QA things.
Yeah, so to give a brief example, if you have, for instance, database code that has basic operations like get record, insert record, delete, update, and you have all this existing code that acts as your database layer, you can plop that into its own Architect plugin. And then you can use that. It's completely reusable. You can even make it into an NPM package and publish it. And then you can tell Architect that you want to use that plugin as part of your application. And then so wherever you go, no matter what application you're using, you can run npm install on your root directory, and it will install that plugin to your node modules folder, and Architect will automatically detect that it's there and load in its resources based on its configuration file. It'll say, I'm a database object, I want to provide this interface, and it'll say, let's say it's Redis, for example. I want to provide Redis DB, and then any other plugin can say, I want to use Redis DB. And let's say you have a users plugin or something, and you want to say, I want to get all the users. So just from your users plugin, you can access the Redis DB object just by asking for it. And so when you think about web application development, typically you're thinking about, okay, I have this web server. Behind the web server, there's going to be users interacting with it. Behind that, we want the database, and behind that, we want logging and all this stuff. And you tend to think of things, if you can think like on a three-dimensional plane, it's kind of like the z-axis. You're going through all of these different layers. But Architect, if you visualize an Architect, it's more like an ecosystem. And so you have all of these different plugins that are able to grab whatever resources they need. And so you don't have to think in terms of how the user is going to interact with it, but rather which resources do you need in each plugin. And it makes it really nice to just configure it that way. I hope some of that made sense.
Yeah, that did. You said something earlier when you were talking about the front-end code, how you said you use CommonJS for most of it, but you also use require.js to dynamically load some stuff. I assume when people open some widget that wasn't used before. How does that work together?
So in each plugin, we have the CommonJS module format, and then I think then inside of it we, or maybe it's outside of that initial call. I can't remember at the moment. We just use require.js to pull in resources. So you can, for instance, if you have a CSS file or something, you can pull that in. And require.js is typically, of course, used for JavaScript, but we modified it. I don't know if, Tim, do you know if we modified it or if require.js allows you to prefix files with the text? And then,
no idea.
There are some plugins, I think, that let you do that.
So we just allow you to load in whatever resources you want. And if it's an XML file or a CSS file, then we just prefix the file extension or the file path with text and an exclamation point, and it will load it in as text. And then you can, for instance, insert that stuff into the DOM or pass the XML to something else if you want it. So require is just used as a as a way to load in resources, and then each extension provides its own methods and an interface basically to use its functionality. And most of the extensions are actually self-contained. And if you want to, for instance, pass off some data to another extension or to tell everyone that something happened, for instance, there's a connection extension, or I think it's called offline, that will tell you when the IDE has come online. And that's an event that's broadcasted across the IDE object. So there's an IDE object that each plugin can load in, and it's part of the core library. And then if they listen for the offline event or the online event, then they can enable or disable functionality as part of that extension. And it's not always the prettiest thing. For instance, we have two different extensions for the tabs container for the editor, and then we have the editor extension. And the editor might need to know when the tabs extension has loaded. And since these things are loaded asynchronously, you listen for the event that says that the tabs extension has loaded, and then the editor can do its thing. And so it's not always the cleanest interface. You have to plan for some contingencies and some weird cases, some weird edge cases. But generally speaking, it all works pretty well. And with our packaged version of Cloud9, all of this works its magic and loads up in about 1,500 milliseconds, I think. So it all works pretty well together.
So I'm wondering, do your developers use this for their own development?
So Architect for instance, has just been out for just a couple months, I think, and it is open source. And I am starting to work on some demos. I've written the proverbial to-do application. Right now I'm working on something that uses GitHub's OAuth. And I just love it. As a developer, I'm just completely enamored with using this technique. On the client side, when we modify architect for doing your client side code like this as well, I'm going to start using that. You know, I like the format, the architecture of the client side libraries, the client side architecture that we use for Cloud9, and it encapsulates things pretty nicely. But I think the broader issue on everyone's mind is, you know, what kind of client-side JavaScript libraries are out there that really allow me to quickly and easily develop nice interfaces and good applications for the web. And that's something that hasn't really been decided yet. So that's always something that's on my mind. You know, what if I'm going to develop my own application? I'm settled on Architect.js and Node on the back end, pretty much exclusively. But on the client side, you know, I'm waiting for Architect.js to be ported to that. But then the next step is, what do we actually use to develop, or, you know, what rich client-side library do we use to develop applications? And I think that's still an open question.
Okay. I'm also wondering if Cloud9 is the IDE of choice for your developers, or do they all use something else like Vim or?
I won't name names, but some people are still holding on to. I think there's one or two hardcore guys who are. The reality is that up until a couple of weeks ago, we weren't really able to use Cloud9. We had to close the loop on local and server-side development, and also enable workspaces to have VMs. And now we're starting to move our process onto the platform. So a lot of the things that we're doing now are online. I know Tim, for instance, has been a pretty hardcore Linux developer for a long time, and he's using C9.io for a lot of his development now. At least it might be proof of concept for him at this point, but yeah, we've been talking about doing this for a long time, and now it's actually possible for us to do things like compile Lua in the cloud. And so yeah, generally speaking, I think 99% of us are using Cloud9 to develop Cloud9 and the local version. And then once we start to upgrade the rest of the processes for online development, the rest of the architecture, then we'll be able to all move on to the online environment.
Yeah, that's really exciting for me, just because it seems like if you're building it but not using it, then it's really hard for you to identify where it falls apart. And right. The other thing that's nice about that is that as you develop it, you know, you start finding areas where what's there is passable, but it's like, gee, it'd be real nice to have a shortcut that would do X, Y, or Z, and just be able to put that in would be a nice thing as well. I do wonder, though, a little bit, is this extensible? So, for example, if I'm doing straight up JavaScript development, it seems like you have a lot of nice tools, but let's say I'm building a Ruby on Rails app in it. Can I build extensions so that it'll run my rate tasks and, migrate my database and do all of the nifty things that are built into that?
Yeah, so that's something, integrations and testing are, we're solving the architectural foundation issues, and then when we can move up from that, then we can solve those really specific workflow issues, rather,
right.
Not workspace, workflow. So that's something that we're still going to work on. But we think of it in terms of building a house. If you don't have a foundation, you really don't have anything. So we're working from that point and then moving upward, and we'll tackle all those things in the next, before the end of the year. We're looking to have full PHP, Ruby, Python support, so that you get that, advanced code analysis and code completion and integration testing and things like that really make you a happy developer.
Cool. Now, I have another question. Sorry, Jameson. I'm
No,
going
it's
to jump in again. So you said that there's a command line feature. I'm playing with it. I haven't seen it. It may just be because I'm on the free version. Is that sort of a custom command line version, sort of like the console that you see in maybe the Chrome web development tools? Or is this more along the lines of like mirroring a bash shell or something?
So there's two things. There's we have a pending pull request from yours truly that shows the command line at the bottom by default. So there's two interfaces. If you go to the view menu and then you select command line, it will show the one at the bottom, which is a customized version of a terminal that we developed and has been in there since day one. It allows you to type in commands like ls, pwd, git commands to commit your code and push it, and so on and so forth. And then we also introduced this terminal, which is, that's a premium feature. But if you go to view terminals and then new terminal, it will give you a direct connection to your VM, and then you can run commands. So I think we probably should have talked before the show and upgraded your account so that you could have seen this.
That's what I thought. I was playing with it this morning and like, man, I really should have asked. Like when we decided we were going to do this.
To be perfectly honest, we didn't give you guys a whole lot of notice, so that's understandable. But I mean, even what's here, it seems extremely useful, and it has a lot of the features that you want. The other thing is that
it has VI bindings.
Yay!
That's all I gotta say.
Not only does it have VI bindings, but if you have that
Vim.
premium terminal, you can go directly into Vim mode.
Yeah, I have to say this: Vim bindings are a usability feature at this point for me. And by usability feature, I mean usability requirement. So,
our biggest day for our latest launch was when we announced initial Vim support for Cloud9. There were just tens of thousands of people flocked to our site all of a sudden. We went, whoa, people really want Vim mode.
Yeah.
You said earlier, you talked about code completion, and in playing with it, that was another thing I was really impressed with. I'm a Vim guy, so I haven't got code completion set up very well yet. There's some stuff that just kind of looks at words that you use in the file, but it doesn't know anything about syntax or APIs or anything. And it seems like the code completion in Cloud9 does. What do you guys use to do that?
We use a library that one of our developers, so we have a couple guys who did their PhDs in language stuff. I'm not even this smart to even describe what they do, but one of our guys built a library called Tree Hugger, which is kind of a play on abstract syntax tree. And it's abstract enough to handle any language, as far as I know. And so we use that to do language analysis. And it's what gives you this, if you define, for instance, a global variable without using the var, you just do x equals 3, it will give you a warning. It will underline it in yellow. It'll give you a warning that says, this variable hasn't been defined before. You're basically introducing a global variable into the JavaScript, and then it will also show you other interesting things. Like if you type array.length instead of th, it'll say, did you mean length? So it does a lot of cool stuff like that.
If you do a GitHub search for LENGHT, you find tons and tons of results. So
I never thought about that. We should build our own bot that analyzes JavaScript.
Does pull requests.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe GitHub should do that. I don't know. So we use TreeHugger to do the analysis, and it has its own language so that you can ask it questions like, show me all of the variables that have never been defined, or show me, I don't know, something about, the keyword this used in an anonymous function or something like that. It will actually tell you all those instances and give you the line numbers and character numbers and things like that. And it's incredibly useful, and it's really cool to actually see it. I think if you look up TreeHugger.js, the guy who wrote it, Zeph Hemmel, who's on our team, has a few demonstrations of it you can see on YouTube or Vimeo. And then I haven't been up to speed on what our latest developments are, but we hired another guy, Lennart Katz, who is working on building that out so that it analyzes the entire code base. And we'll give you, so right now it'll actually do code completion for Node.js, the core libraries. It'll also do code completion for all of your open files. And in the future, it'll do it for your entire project and Node modules, so that you get the real kind of IntelliSense that people have expected from Visual Studio.
All right, cool.
That sounds like a killer feature. That, if I can't figure out some way to wrangle that into Vim, that would be enough to make me consider switching.
No Vim switchers here. All right. Well, is there anything else that you guys want to talk about? We need to get to the picks pretty soon because I'm under some time constraints, but we do have a few more minutes if there's something you want to go over.
I think one of the most incredible features, and I just mentioned this briefly earlier, is this this ability to do remote file system, and it's not something that we heavily promoted in our release. But this idea that if you have your own development server, I think there's this dream of every developer having their own development server that has all this awesome power, and it exists entirely in the cloud, so you can share your project with everyone. We have this ability to connect remotely over a Node utility that we built, and to your own server, and run your code and run your commands on your own server. And Cloud9 basically acts as the interface for that. So I just wanted to promote that briefly because I think it's a really cool feature. And on Cloud9, even premium or free accounts get a free private project, so they can test this out. It's just when you create a new project on the dashboard, it gives you the option to use SSH. And then you type in your SSH details. You just have to copy the key that we give you, the SSH key, to your server. Make sure you have Node installed, and then we'll connect to it, and then you get your own server right on Cloud9. So
that's also awesome.
So could you effectively then be live editing code on your own server?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and running all of your commands on your own server. So everything is piped to and from. The file tree is abstracted, so we don't have to worry about that. All of your files are loaded in. You can even drag and drop your files directly to the file tree, and it'll upload it directly to your server.
Wow.
So this is my pet feature.
Yeah.
Because I have a bunch of sites that are on Linodes, on these Linux VPS boxes.
Uh-huh.
And one of the main reasons I use Linux is because Linux has a really good VFS built into GNOME. You can edit your files as if they're local. And so I made sure this feature was added to Cloud9 because it's a requirement for me.
Right. That makes sense. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So the next time I get a rescue project from a client where the developer didn't use any sort of version control, I can just use something like this to connect to it and edit it on the fly.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to do client work before starting with Cloud9, and I ported, some of my old clients still contact me, of course, and ask for little updates. And I ported all of the connection settings to Cloud9, FTP projects, because we handle those, and then remote server projects over SSH. And just I used to use Coda, and having to manage connections from my laptop and my desktop, even though it sounds so stupid, it's not like this big deal, but one set of credentials goes out of date, and then you have to update it, getting the credentials from the other computer, or even if I go to a client's house, I can edit on their computer. So all these things that it just takes care of because it's all on the web now, and we tunnel the connection is really a crazy awesome feature.
Nice. All right. Well, let's get into the picks. Jameson, do you want to kick us off with picks?
Sure. So my first pick is a little OS X utility. It goes up in your menu bar. It's called Menu Meters.
Uh-huh.
And if you ever find yourself opening Activity Monitor on OS X all the time to check, like, is there some crazy process running away, or am I using tons of bandwidth on my network or something? This just puts it all up in little widgets on your menu. It's pretty sweet. You can customize how they look, so it's fine. It's free. It's really nice. I refer to them often. My other one, I've been playing a lot with Go recently, and at Google I/O they had a great talk by Rob Pike. He's one of the inventors of Go, and it's called Go Concurrency Patterns. Concurrency in Go is one of the things that I thought was the coolest. It was one of the most unique parts of it to me. So he shows off how to do concurrency in Go, and it's really cool. Lots of other things in Go are really nice, but they're just like nice how you would expect them to be nice. It's not like mind blowing, but this was pretty sweet. So those are my picks.
Awesome. AJ said that he was going to come in. He was going to find a quiet space and actually join us for the picks. AJ, are you on?
I'm here. You hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
You're lurking.
Yeah, just lurking today. So 2 picks I've got. One is Super Better. I was watching a TED Talk, and, well, first of all, a while ago, I was just thinking about how sad it is that there's a lot of people that are just addicted to games. They play World of Warcraft all day, and that's all they do, and they lose their job, and they drop out of school. And I've actually had roommates where that's what has happened, because they just get addicted to online gaming. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool if there was a game where, in order to advance in the game, you have to do interactions in the real world that are actual real things that will make you really happy. And so somebody who is a game designer she had like a concussion, and then that caused her to go through a period of depression because her brain was physically damaged.
And she couldn't play WoW anymore?
Yeah, she couldn't play WoW anymore, but she designed a game that is called Super Better, and I'm not quite sure how it works yet because I've only done 1 day of it so far, but you basically put in things that you like to do, and then you have to do them in order to get the points to advance in the game. And so it's like a game to help you overcome challenges or to help motivate you to do something that you want to accomplish. So that's really cool. And then I discovered Adafruit, which is the website that's really big for the Arduino people, and it's just got all these cool little sensors on it and everything. And I got my first Arduino a few weeks ago, and so I just bought some stuff off of Adafruit so that I'll have a breadboard and wires and one of these breakout kits. And I also have my Raspberry Pi now too, so I got a few things off of there for that. And I'm excited to start getting more hands-on type tech work.
So are you addicted to physical device gizmo playing stuff?
Yes, I am a little bit addicted to...
That was eloquently put, Chuck.
I was trying to find the right words, and those were the ones that came out. So, all right. Tim, do you have some picks for us?
Yes. Quick note, I also have 1 million small electronic devices in my home. My bathroom nightlight is a Arduino Uno with a program that color cycles an LED.
Sweet. I would love to have stuff like that.
The things that people do with their time sometimes.
I mean, it only costs like $30 for one of these, and you can make anything out of it.
You know what my dream is? My dream is to build my own clap light with an Arduino.
Your own what?
That hard.
My clap light. You know where you clap them on and off?
Oh, right.
So I
don't have very good dreams, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm aiming low.
I so want to find one of those videos, the clap on, clap off, the dumb song. Anyway.
So for my pick, I don't know. Mike Paul has been posting some really cool stuff on the LuaJIT wiki lately. He's the author behind the LuaJIT engine. He's a really, really smart VM hacker. And so he's been writing these articles, like his most recent one is allocation syncing optimizations. And it's a VM optimization he does in the engine, but he explains the scripts and what kind of scripts trigger the optimizations. And as a person who writes scripts all day, I like understanding what kind of code is good for the engine and why. And so it's a really good read. There may be similar things for V8 and JavaScript engines, but I haven't seen a lot of writings as clear as the stuff Mike is writing.
Oh, cool.
I'm always concerned with those VM specific optimizations that they'll go out of date. Like, how do you make sure that, are you just always trying to stay on top of what the newest stuff is for writing good code for the VM you're on? Or
Well, you don't optimize for the VM. What you do is you understand the VM and then take that into account when you write your code. There's a very subtle but important difference. I mean, ideally, you write the code that's easiest for you, and the VM author optimizes for your code.
Yeah.
But I mean, certain patterns of code are simply easier to implement. If you know how a computer works at all the different levels, then you can be a lot more efficient in your decisions.
Yeah, and I have to ask too, which code is more valuable, the code that runs faster on the VM or the code that's less bug prone?
I mean, yeah, obviously it needs to be stable. I mean,
Right.
if it's wrong, who cares how fast it is?
Right.
So just be aware of what it does, but write good code.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the point. All right, and any other picks? We kind of derailed you for a minute.
That's all I got.
Okay, cool. So my first pick is motor oil. And I pointed this out.
drink? Come on, Chuck.
I pointed this out on the Ruby Freelancer show. If you get busy and neglect to change or put more oil into your car's engine, bad things tend to happen.
Oh, no.
For example, when you're driving out to your in-laws' house and you get to about the furthest point from either end, the city on either end of the canyon. Yeah. So I either broke a conrod or blew up a piston or something because I didn't have enough oil in the car. And I lost 4 days to replacing the engine in my car. So my pick is motor oil because it's a very handy thing to have in your car.
It's also not a drink.
Not a drink.
Don't drink it. I once had an oil leak and shot a piston through my oil pan.
Awesome.
Pretty much destroyed the car.
I can imagine. Yeah, we went down to the junkyard and we bought a secondhand engine and put it into the car. And yeah, that just entails dropping the whole front end out of the car and then taking the engine off and then putting the new engine on and putting it back in. Sounds simple, except for that everything connects to the engine. So, yeah. But it's fixed now. It only cost me about 4 days, which I'm trying to decide still if it was worth it. But anyway, my other pick is actually something that we talked about on the Ruby Freelancer show this morning. We interviewed CJ Hayden, who is the author of Get Clients Now. And Get Clients Now is a book for service workers like freelance developers. And it basically gives you a 28-day process for increasing the amount of or the number of clients that you're finding. And it is it's fairly comprehensive, but it really helps you focus on the areas where your marketing pipeline needs help. And it's just a super book. And so I'm going to go ahead and pick that on here just because I was so impressed. And I was also really impressed with just, all of the good stuff that she went over in the interview on the other podcast. So go check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes to both the book and the episode on rubyfreelancers.com. And anyway, those are my picks. Matt, what are your picks?
So I didn't know that we were doing this.
Oh, who talked to you?
And
you can mention anything that's cool. I mean, most of the time Jameson picks some kind of music or something. Sometimes we pick TV shows or just whatever.
Right. Let me see if I can think of something. What's something that I've been using lately?
Yeah, something that puts you up on
I got one.
Cloud9.
I got a good one. Can we post it in the show notes?
Yes, we will put it in the show notes.
It's a script. And okay, so my pick is this script that one of our developers created that you can put in your bookmarks toolbar that for people who are creating a lot of issues on GitHub, you can just click this link and it'll automatically inject some predefined text that you want to have appear. So if you have a certain structure for filing bug reports, like steps to reproduce or suggested assignee or description and things like that, this will automatically inject all of that template text into the issue body, and then you can just fill out the details.
That sounds really cool. Yeah, go ahead and put it in the Skype chat, and we'll use it. Or if you want to put it in a gist and then put a link to the gist, that's
probably a good idea.
So yeah, sounds great. All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks, Matt, for coming onto the show again, and
thank you.
Tim is also an expert over there at Cloud9, so we'll give him a thank you, even though he's a regular.
That was really cool to listen to.
Glad you liked it. Thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to giving it a little bit more of a try. So you can find the show in the iTunes store. You can also subscribe to the show if you're using something else, just by going to javascriptjabber.com. If you do look us up in the iTunes store, don't forget to leave us a review. We really appreciate it, and it helps us kind of get up in the rankings where other people can find us. Also, if you recommend us on Twitter or anything, the Twitter handle for the show is JSJabber. And beyond that, we will just look forward to talking to you next week.
All right, see you guys later.
Thanks, guys.
Adios.
See ya.